This chapter is called Grape Monsters, and it deals with vineyard issues leading up to the harvest. So I thought I'd share with you a picture of very ripe grapes. These are our Grenache grapes. The cluster is actually quite large, and it's quite beautiful to behold. So I wanted to share that with you. All right, let's move to the story. Grape Monsters. Paul, who sidestepped the sidewinder, woke to a glorious blood-orange peel in the sky and went for a morning jog starting at the vineyard's bottom and worked his way higher, switching back and climbing, trotting like a high-stepping Morgan horse, knees reaching 90 degrees angles to his torso, short strides, not to outrun his ability to stop should he confront the white Leviathan. He reached the lower Tempranillo block, where vines' trunks were thick as trees and grapes the size of quarters. Here's the juice that will overflow the tanks. He continued jogging to higher rows and arrived at the top of the Tempranillo, an area of rugged, rocky terrain, vines struggling to cling to the granite mountainside, berries smaller than dimes with intense, concentrated flavors. These will blend beautifully with the large grapes below. Character comes from the top of the vineyard, juice from the bottom. This year's grapes will make the best Tempranillo ever, a wine so sublime, so enjoyable, so easy to drink, an aphrodisiac of seduction that wins gold medals and puts San Diego wines on the map. He stopped before a vine offering her fruit. With thumb and forefinger, he gently plucked a berry from her breast without scratching her soft skin. He inserted it into his mouth, gently rolled it with his tongue against his teeth to peel it, then bit it in half to test the juice and assess the skin's tannin. He gently pushed a seed with his tongue between his teeth, picked the kernel with his fingers, and spit out the remains. Seeds slow roasted from green to brown, and as they aged, they hardened. He bit the seed and knew from experience these grapes were approaching perfect ripeness because of the seed's crunchiness and the berry's sweetness. Because the bigger grapes below were less ripe, he would do what he could to slow ripening at the top by irrigating, and accelerate ripening below by opening the canopy to make sure the sun shone on the grapes and cutting water. He could also harvest at different times, picking grapes up top first, then wait 10 to 14 days for the bottom to ripen further, and blend the wine from the top with the bottom, and with the skill of a painter, a sculptor, a director, the result would be a masterpiece. Or maybe he would use the grapes from the top and the middle to vent the signal varietal estate Tempranillo, while using juicy grapes below, accented with some Grenache from the other side of the vineyard, to make a pink, blush, crisp rosé wine destined for a unicorn's princess. Good wine is made in the vineyard. At the top of the row of Tempranillo, Paul heard a buzzing band of yellow jackets. What are they up to? Are the flying piranhas stripping a chipmunk of fur, skin, and muscles? He saw a random cluster of grapes on the ground. How did that get there? And another a few steps away. Passengers thrown from a high-speed collision, bees buzzing, ants crawling, bleeding grapes strewn across the vineyard floor, a bloody train wreck. Further on, he found a cane ripped from the vine with an entire cluster of grapes attached, half the berries chomped, grape blood flowing from punctured berries, sap oozing from wounded wood. A few steps further, the nets were cleanly slit, as if by a knife, then ripped. He was witness to a crime scene, rape of the vines and bloody murder of grapes. Who, what, would do such a thing? As the first responder, he bound up the fallen, amputated wounded limbs of the living, and patched damaged nets with green tape and twist ties to keep birds out, for no sooner was there a hole in the nets, yellow birds patrolling the sky dove in to attack the survivors. After triage and cleaning up the carnage, he drove to his daytime job. As the sun hovered over the Pacific that evening in the waning days of summer, all was calm and clear. The clouds of May gray and June gloom long forgotten, the vineyard canvas returning to a Cézanne painting at sunset, a pastel mélange of ochre, green, brown, and blue, The merry farmer walked down the rows, plucking any green berries, closing any gaps in the nets, freeing any trapped bird. The next morning, Paul witnessed another magnificent dawn, then trotted up the hill, energized by Purple Mountain's majesty, the shining sea, the musical symphony of vines, until he arrived at the top 3 rows of the ripest Tempranillo and bore witness to another scene of senseless carnage. Sorrow replaced surprise. On the 3rd day, sorrow turned to anger when he found victims from another massacre. Who is this great monster? Something must be done. Paul called Carrie Ann for advice. Sounds to me like you've got a chupacabra, she said. What the heck is that? A grape-sucking, goat-killing beast? How do I get rid of it? The last time I was in Texas visiting Jenny Lee, she had one running around her heirloom tomatoes. We sat outside at night under the stars with a shotgun and blanket and waited. You killed it? The only thing we killed was a bottle of wine. Maybe what you've got is a raccoon. I've never seen a raccoon here. Well, they're a nuisance for Texas wineries. Armadillos dig holes under fences for raccoons to crawl under, and they'll strip a vineyard faster than a girl at a titty bar. I wouldn't know about that, said Paul, blushing more than his rosé. How can I tell if it's a raccoon? Look for their shad. If it's got grape seeds in it, that's your chupacabra. A raccoon could clean out a row of vines quicker than Alex's platoon the refrigerator. But could there be a raccoon in the hidden hills? Paul and Sheila had never seen one up here. When they lived near the coast, raccoons were common and preyed on their garbage. One evening, Paul threw his shoe at the glowing eyes of the dark. The raccoons threw it back. Sheila, during a fit of anger, threw her wedding ring outside. Instead of tossing it back, Mama Raccoon kept the diamonds as an accessory for her fur coat until Sheila found it in the garden years later. Tussling with raccoons wasn't all fun and games. Koi in their pond hid under rocks whenever a raccoon approached with his fishing pole. Inevitably, the masked thief left with sashimi. Inspired by fond memories of the tiki room and hotels in China where bamboo cages housed colorful songbirds, Paul hung 2 empty bird cages above the back patio of his house. On Easter Eve, as his children slept, Paul placed a blue parakeet in one cage, Kate named her Tulip, and a green parakeet in the other. Alex named him Easter. His kids were delighted with the birds, whose music filled the house. The next evening, near midnight, Sheila woke to see a masked bandit open the cage, reach in with black-gloved hand, grab Easter around the neck, and scamper into the woods. In the morning, Paul told Alex a raccoon opened Easter's cage, and the bird flew to heaven. Remember when Jesus came back 3 days later? Easter will do the same. Wait and see. Paul returned to the bird breeder, purchased another parakeet with green feathers, and put it in the empty cage at night. So when Alex awoke and saw the bird, he believed. Kate, 4 years older, was suspicious. Daddy, why is Easter much bigger? He flew to college and grew up. Raccoons fascinated young Paul from the day his father made a toy raccoon from an authentic fur pelt and tail he requisitioned from Disney's Frontierland. Paul brought the stuffed animal to school for show and tell, fooling teachers and friends who believed it was alive. One day at home, he approached a raccoon family in the backyard and pet one of the little critters as he would a kitten or puppy. His father swooped in and warned him not to touch raccoons, shifting Paul's perception from a friendly animal to a rabies carrier, which he didn't fully comprehend, but wasn't good if it required 8 shots in the stomach. Was there a bushy tail protruding from his vestments? Impossible. Then again, it was too dark to tell, but could that have been Rocky Raccoon, disguised as a day laborer, or Padre walking to their vineyard? Could it have been a Japanese tanuki, searching for sake and wine? Paul knew from his Japan travels tanuki is a clever mythological creature, deft at stealing sake, wine, and yakitori from a grill when the cook isn't looking. If something went missing or couldn't be found, the Japanese blamed it on tanuki. Paul sought out an expert and drove to San Diego's best sushi restaurant, Sushi Ota, for advice. The owner loaned Paul a stone statue of a tanuki god dressed in monk's frock, carrying a jug of wine to place in the vineyard as a peace offering. The tanuki, more real than imagined, would not be thwarted by an idol, and Paul found another scene of grape carnage. Indeed, a tanuki-like creature had moved into Paul's grotto, sheltered from winter rains and winds. His thick fur coat had a sleek, oily sheen from devouring avocados he stole from their trees. With an abundance of food and no dog on the property to hound him, Rocky Raccoon stayed, his belly ballooning. Paul purchased a have-a-heart cage, baiting it with marshmallows, irresistible catnip for raccoons. Ants swarmed over Paul's sticky fingers as he threw the fluffy white sugar balls to the back of the cage and set the trap door open. In the morning, he found a rabbit. Do rabbits eat marshmallows? He released the rabbit, telling her to eat more greens and less sugar, and tossed her tender tops he snipped from the vines. That evening, he bait the trap with peanut butter, sprinkled with homegrown macadamia nuts on top. Paul went to bed worrying what to do after he trapped Rocky. Would that be catching a tiger by the tail? He didn't keep firearms in the house because he didn't want Sheila to shoot him. He could find an exterminator to come over with high-velocity tools for use at point-blank range, or he could call Miguel, who would be happy to shoot it. Paul tossed and turned and ground his teeth as he dreamed of capturing and killing the wild animal. He saw a masked raccoon foraging along a row, nibbling through nets, ripping holes with hands, and then, with utmost dexterity, picking grapes faster than the vineyardista herself. Rocky, hungry for more, gripped with his mightier-than-human hand a cane, ripping it to reach a large cluster. That cane, the hope of the next year's vintage, rendered useless, tossed to the ground. Paul saw Rocky nearing the trap, catching the scent of the irresistible treat. That's it. Go in. A little closer now. A little bit farther now. There's treasure for you. Never mind the ants. It's delicious. There you go. Step and the trigger is released. The door slams. Trapped. Yes. Victory. I'll deal with you in the morning. And Paul rolled over in his bed, diving into deeper sleep. He heard barks, shrieks, high-pitched trumpets, the apocalypse announced by heaven's excommunicated dogs. Coyotes. They circled the cage, and Rocky screamed for his life. Busted, jailed, surrounded. Coyotes shouted with glee, waking up the neighborhood. Raccoon! We've caught a raccoon! Raccoon! They howled with delight, then snapped at Rocky, who, behind the cage's bars, was momentarily safe from the jaws of coyotes, whose howls turned dark with frustration. A hideous chorus crescendo to frenzied climax. Then all was quiet. Rocky ripped to shreds. Paul, relieved coyotes did his dirty work, went back to sleep, this time soundly. When he walked up the hill at dawn's first light to clean up the mess, he found the cage where he left it. Empty, door open, bait intact. Several feet away, he found yellow jackets buzzing where grapes were scattered. Nets ripped, branches torn. At this rate, there'll be no grapes left to make wine, Paul calculated, and with growing sadness, he bound up the wounded, amputated limbs that couldn't be saved, and wondered, is it time to call it quits? After work, he returned home, changed into jeans and an old white button-down shirt, and entered the vineyard with shovel, green tape, and twist ties. He mended holes, saw the beautiful grapes, and reminded himself you can never give in to terrorists, and you live to fight another day. He kept the endgame in mind, tasted some berries, and though some seeds were still green, most had turned darker and harder, and soon it would be time to pick, and he could romp in the pick bin with his muses, as they massage grapes with their toes. In farming, there's always something: pest, disease, drought. The grape monster was a test of Paul the farmer's strength and perseverance. He invested his soul, his spirit, his life into the grapes, but now he woke to the glory of nature each morning to witness destruction and waste. The harvest is coming. Everything you've worked for is only 2 weeks away. Keep going. He needed to find out what he was dealing with. He had a suspect, but wanted proof. He purchased a hunter's trail video camera with infrared light and motion sensor to catch the monster of the night on video. He set the camera along the monster's favorite row and baited the cage with grilled salmon and marshmallows. In the morning, he walked up the hill and found the cage untouched. He brought the camera to the house to see what it recorded. He plugged a USB cable into the camera and his laptop. The first video showed flying insects. The next video showed a large furry creature backing into the camera. Could the grape monster be the Golden State's mascot? Holy smoky bear! No wonder I've lost so many grapes. He looked at the next clip and saw the bear's back, but as it moved forward, he saw a white patch on its rear, and then it hopped. Could a rabbit be the grape fiend after all? Paul returned to the vineyard, reset the camera, and heard a bird fluttering frantically for an opening to escape. In her hysteria, she became tangled. Instead of releasing the trespasser, Paul, fed up with birds ignoring his warnings, locked her up using Tulip's bamboo cage. When both cages were filled, he constructed a large penitentiary with chicken coop wire and extra netting. There were yellow and green birds, orioles and finches, dozens of birds calling their comrades to rescue them. What are you going to feed them? Sheila asked, suspecting he was going mad. Grapes. He diagnosed her insanity when he discovered her playing with birds in their living room. How did they get inside, he asked, wondering if she brought some jailbirds inside on furlough. They flew in. Why didn't you shoo them outside? They'll mess up your house. I'm singing with them, she said, and he let it go, a sign of her solitude without their dog. Paul used clusters damaged by the grape monsters as bait in the Have-a-Heart trap, and the rest he fed to the jailbirds, which became club-fed, as they invited feathered friends on the outside to dinner. To keep them from escaping, he sprinkled salt on their tails. If a surviving cluster was intact except for a pet grape or two, Paul used scissors to cut away a damaged berry, as a surgeon removes a tumor. He possessed good hand, eye, and foot coordination and took pride perfecting his surgical technique, and told Sheila he should have been a doctor, to which she agreed, adding, "And then we'd have more money." Occasionally, a small, feisty bird tried to wiggle his body through the mesh, his head and one wing protruding through the net, thin as fish line wrapped tightly around the wing. Unable to fly, the royal surgeon, to Her Majesty the Queen of the Vineyard, the Vogelfanger, the prophet of Bluey the dog, gently picked up the tiny creature, saying, "The good Lord in heaven looks after the feather of every sparrow," and the bird, nervous as hell, who initially pecked his hand trying to save him, was calmed, put his trust in Paul, and looked up with submissive eyes as he gently probed, found the last piece of constricted net, and with the same mini scissors he used to cut the tiny toenails of Kate and Alex's babies, snipped the string, freeing the wing, upon which, without even a thank you, the bird escaped, and Paul yelled, "Don't come back!" His affection for birds contrasted with the 7th grader, who fired a dozen BBs into a helpless, flapping bird he shot from a tree, the irony not lost on the vintner, who viewed efforts rescuing birds his penitence. Paul went for his morning jog and found the familiar scene of destruction. He downloaded the video files. The first showed a rabbit. 5 minutes later, a coyote crossed the ground where the rabbit had been, eyes glowing as he faced the camera. In the next video, the coyote's tail pointed at the camera as he chewed grapes like a pig at a trough, gnashing grapes and nets between his teeth, then sticking his nose under the net where he chomped grapes unfettered. The grape monster was a coyote. Paul switched tactics to guard the vineyard. Before going to sleep, he patrolled the vineyard with a flashlight and his shovel. With all quiet, he returned to the house to sleep a few hours, and when the clock struck least, he dragged himself out of bed, as he had done for Kate and Alex, his babies, to prepare their formula, for he cared as much about his grapes the week before harvest as his children as infants. He staggered, zombie-like, to a switch controlling a bank of outside lights, whispering to Sheila, "It's just me. Go back to sleep." He made sure he heard no owls, not wanting to shock their eyes, flooded the vineyard with light, threw open the bathroom door, and shouted, "Coyote! Hey, Coyote!" The neighbors' pit bulls, allies in defending the property, started barking, and the vineyardista, startled from sleep, started barking too. "Are you crazy? Come back to bed. I have to protect the grapes." Paul dressed, stepped outside, took the shovel by the door, opened and shut the iron gate of the French terrace with a loud clang, and like a virtuoso pianist, sliding fingers down the keys, he banged the shovel against each wrought iron bar as he ascended the hill, shouting, "Coyote! Hey, Coyote!" He was deep in the vineyard's darkness, dragging his rickety, clanking shovel behind him like prisoners' chains, a scary image of the night, so Coyote knew he was coming, and the neighbor's pit bull barked encouragement. "I don't want to find myself surrounded by a pack. If it happens again, Bluey's not here to save me." He continued up the hill, cautious of any snake, reached the area that suffered the most onslaughts, and turned on a flashlight to scan the rows with a bright beam. All quiet. He returned to the house and slept until dawn. The evening patrols worked, and Paul found no damage. On the morning of the third day, and each day thereafter, he found buzzing bees and mangled grapes, consoled by the pit bull who circled the area, sniffing in case Coyote had stuck around. With his losses compounding and sleep deficit increasing, he was tired in the office during afternoons, dozing off for a minute here and there, and became irritated, uncharacteristic of someone normally so optimistic. New tactics were called for. Miguel, endowed with a coyote's mind, suggested putting out buckets of water. "The coyote is thirsty. We don't have no trouble with coyotes at Joe's." "That's because our grapes are more delicious than yours," replied Paul. Sheila prepared 2 silver bowls of fresh water for Bluey's grave each morning and evening. Paul, who couldn't understand the logic of serving food and water for a dead dog, carried buckets of water to the ripest rows where Coyote was likely to strike. The result, Coyote now had water with grapes. Paul had unwittingly trained Coyote to enjoy fine dining. Sheila set rat traps along the vine's cordons, but Coyote just went to another row. Sheila cut long fronds from her Phoenix Canarius palm trees with thick, sharp needles pointing upwards, and laid the spikes under grape bunches as a booby trap. Coyote sidestepped those dangerous thorns. However, as Sheila cleaned up, one of the needles jabbed her finger and lodged beneath her skin, requiring a trip to her favorite doctor. Paul pissed at the entrance to his favorite rows. It's a good thing the wires weren't electrified, sending a strong message. This land was Paul's, which caught Coyote off guard. Coyote sniffed, lifted his leg, and covered Paul's mark with his own stream, then walked to an unmarked row to dine. Paul noticed Coyote didn't strike the row he had marked and decided to mark all the rows. "I'll ask Alex to bring over a platoon of buddies. We'll drink a keg of beer and piss all over the vineyard." He loved the idea, but Sheila didn't. So, to much complaining from his wife, who sang songs about her husband's insanity, Paul collected his urine in 5-gallon water containers, not ones used for winemaking, until he had enough to spread around the vineyard perimeter. For Coyote, hydration was a matter of life or death, so faced with the choice between real thirst or an unseen human, Coyote chose the grapes. Paul shifted tactics again, this time unnetting a row of Merlot grapes grown from canes gifted to him by Merlot Mac. Oh, Merlot, poor Merlot, how mistreated you are. First, sideways defamed you, and now sacrificed to save Tempranillo. Between midnight and dawn, the neighbors' pit bulls barked, signaling the arrival of dinner guests who dined on Merlot, washed them down with cool water with buckets left in the rows, and left a tip of scap-dotted grape skins. Appeasement to bullies, terrorists, and dictators always fails. Many wine growers drop fruit at veraison, weeding out clusters that won't fully ripen before harvest, or in case of overcropping, to remove excess fruit so flavors would be more concentrated with what's left. Their objective is to grow the best fruit, not the most. Paul wondered if he could train Coyote to drop fruit for him. When he found a bunch that under ordinary circumstances he'd drop, he rewrapped the net to intentionally position this bunch outside relative safety. Ignoring the offering, Coyote, whom Paul began calling the fucking Coyote, borrowing the expression from Miguel, preferred clusters of the hidden, forbidden fruit to satiate his grape addiction. The grapes sure tasted good. No wonder Bluey always tried to sneak a bite when no one was looking. Paul's prized Tempranillo dwindled as attrition took its toll. Worse, Coyote's shoot trimming method was similar to Miguel's, damaging canes needed for next year's fruit, irritating Paul even more. Miguel should know better. Perhaps he's a coyote. He certainly knows coyotes. Paul sought out his advice, finding him at the bottom of the mountain at the 15 junction selling wood he borrowed from his client's property and bottles of unmarked wine borrowed from Joe the wino's cellar, claiming he made the wine from unwanted grapes. "Hey, amigo, how are you?" Paul asked. "Not too bad." "Did you get a new dog?" "No, but I got a fucking coyote eating my grapes. Sheila said it was you stealing our grapes, but I found out it was a coyote. They don't eat our grapes. That's because yours are no good. You should put water out for him. He's thirsty." "I tried that already. Any other suggestions?" "Set a bear trap. That'll take care of him." "That's too cruel. Then shoot him. If you want me to send over a couple of guys tonight with guns." "No, thank you. I'll take care of it myself." "Let me shoot him for you." "A coyote shooting a coyote? Gracias, no," said Paul, who drove into town to buy a pellet gun to scare the coyote as the conflict escalated. The next morning, Paul found a yellow bird stuck in the nets. He gave the netting a gentle shake, but the bird wouldn't come loose because thin strings of net were wrapped around her ankles and neck. Paul feared if he pulled her out, her leg or head would pop off, so he took scissors and cut the threads binding her feet and neck, and she fluttered to the ground, but couldn't fly away. Thin net, hidden beneath feathers, constricted the wing. With care and affection, Paul picked up the frightened bird and shifted into surgeon mode, while she put trust in her handler. Paul gently brushed back the feathers and soft down, revealing the wing's bare, dimpled skin, reminding him of plucked pigeons in Mary Frances' Filet poultry market, and saw a string wrapped around the wing pit. He slowly, cautiously, pressed the bottom blade of scissors against the bird's bare skin and tried to edge it under the string, but feared puncturing her skin. He paused, took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and contemplated his choices. Damn the torpedoes and go for it? Or leave the bird in peace? A death sentence since she can't fly. Hippocratic oath, do no harm. And the confidence of the world-renowned surgeon evaporated. To cut or not to cut, to be or not to be. Paul carried the bird from the steep hillside to the house, where he could get a better angle by standing on level pavement. Shall I let you go? Try to save you? Which will it be? Only harm can come from this. Where's the Lord who looks after the feathers of every sparrow? What are you doing? Sheila called, raking leaves in front of the house. Saving a bird. Don't hurt her. I won't. Could you help me? She joined him on the front porch. Oh no, you hurt her. I didn't, said Paul. The net's wound tight around the wing. Could you go inside and get tweezers? Paul stroked the bird's crown and nape smoothly to keep her calm until Sheila returned. She's beautiful. What do you want me to do? You hold her, and I'll cut the string, said Paul, slowly passing the bird to Sheila's open hands, then wrapping his hands around hers as he cut the bird who pecked her. Ouch! Hold her firmly, but gently. Paul picked up the tweezers with his left hand and the scissors with his right and instructed, tilt her belly up. Sheila positioned the bird's yellow belly skywards. I'm going to use the tweezers to lift the string and slip the scissors underneath, okay? Okay, go ahead. Paul took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. He took a half breath, held it, and with his left hand pinched the taut line with the tweezers while pressing the blade against the skin and slid it. The bird fluttered. Paul snipped the string. Sheila screamed. Oh my God, what did you do? Sheila shouted when she saw blood on her hands. She dropped the bird who flapped on the ground. Paul bent down and picked her up. What are you going to do now? She asked. What I have to do, said Paul. He picked up his shovel and started up the hill. Stop! Don't do that. Let me take her to the animal hospital. They'll take care of her. Paul ignored her pleas and marched up the hill to the property's furthest corner. He placed the bird on the ground, who looked up at him with black eyes, surrounded by bright yellow plumage, imagining her thoughts. My God, why have you forsaken me? He told her not to worry, recalling these words. Isaac asked his father Abraham, where is the animal for the sacrifice? And Abraham responded, the Lord will provide. Paul looked up, expecting to see a great horned ram appear under the rocky crag above him, and the bird to fly away. He looked down, and the blood-stained bird gazed at him. He raised the shovel and prayed, Lord, bless this innocent bird, and please forgive me. With one downward swing, it was finished. The pair of swallows, nesting under the house's eaves, observed all this and flew out over the vineyard, continued west over the valley of death towards the ocean, and banked right in the direction of San Juan Capistrano.